All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to get some housekeeping things out of the way first. So some programs that we have coming up that might be of interest to you. On Wednesday, November the 15th, we have a Lincoln and Thanksgiving program. It's an actual portrayal of Lincoln. And that's going to be from 7 to 8 p.m. Live on Zoom. So that's a good opportunity if you're already into the government to see a portrayal of one of our former presidents. We also have a program coming up on Monday, November 20th at 6:30, and that's going to be all about stock and bond investing. And that's going to be in our large meeting room and live on Zoom, as will the Lincoln and Thanksgiving program. So both some fun things that we have coming up, and then just some other housekeeping reminders. We do ask everyone to silence their cell phones. I guess if you're at home, you don't have to silence your cell phone. If you're in person, it would be helpful if you silence your cell phone. The bathrooms are out in the lobby. So if you came in from the parking lot, if you kind of wend towards the way that you came in from the parking lot and go into that little alcove, you'll find the restroom. We just ask that if you come in and go out, that you try to do so without disturbing your neighbors. Hold on, I'm going to let someone in. Oh, good. You figured it out. If you're having trouble hearing me right now, we do have listen anywhere devices in the back. So what those can do is they can play directly to a hearing aid, or you can put on the headphones and it'll play the sound from the microphone directly into your ears. So if you're having any trouble hearing me right now, or if you think you might have trouble hearing the presenters, feel free to grab one of those listen anywhere devices. And if you come find me in the back, I can help you figure out how it works. This program will be recorded. That said, sometimes we do have little video and audio kerfuffles. So I do hope to get this up on YouTube. But if we have any issues with that, then we'll let everyone know. And we do have a former version of this program on our YouTube page presented by one of our other ward aldermen in Elmhurst. And let's see, what else do I need to share before we get started here? We will hold all questions until the end, and just something to keep in mind for in-house folks. The people on Zoom won't be able to hear your questions, so the presenter will be repeating your question and then answering it. And then I'll be answering questions, I'll be asking the questions from the folks on Zoom. So if you're at home on Zoom, through the chat tab or through the Q&A tab, you can go ahead and submit your questions, and then I'll ask those questions for you at the end. And similarly for the folks on Zoom, you can see and hear us, but we can't see and hear you. So the only way to interact is through that chat tab or through the Q&A tab, submit your questions. And I think now we're going to go ahead and get started. So here today with us, we have our second ward alderman, and we have both of them today. So that's an extra treat. So we have Jacob Hill and we have Karen Sienko here to tell us about how Elmhurst city government works. Yay.
Okay, how does this sound for hearing? Is this okay? All right. Thank you so much for coming out on a Thursday night. It's a busy night. I know I had a busy night too. We're glad to come back here and talk. As I'm sure we might accidentally mention a few times tonight, we're also both librarians. So we like to do things together as librarians. I am a professor and librarian at Elmhurst University, an academic library. I'll let Karen introduce where she works in a minute. But we both feel very comfortable in the library and speaking in front of people, and after the pandemic, even more comfortable speaking virtually, since we seem to have to do that all the time. But this is a tradition to have alder people speak about city operations at a public forum and talk about what it is we do and what the process is like and who gets what when you have a suggestion or complaint or concern or useful tidbit. Where does that go when it goes to the city, and what is the process it follows? And I'll say a couple things. First, I would welcome questions of clarification while we're talking. So if there's something that I'm not being clear about, or either feel free to ask for clarification and we'll address that as we go on. And we'll try to be, keep things moving, keep things focused. But another interesting thing is that we're two fairly new aldermen. So there have been aldermen that have served over 20 years on city council. Both of us, I think I can safely say, did not think we'd be involved in any form of governance. We were residents like you. I had no interest in being on city council. I did not know who my alderman at the time was. It actually was the mayor when I was in Ward 5, and then moved. But I got involved through a local issue related to flooding. And I brought it to city council's attention for my particular neighborhood. And I found myself in more of a leadership role. And then my alderperson departed. So it was suggested that maybe I go up for appointment. And I put my hat in the ring. And surprisingly, there I was, appointed to fill the vacant position that Norm Leader had occupied for many years in Ward 2. And then the stipulation was from then Mayor Steve Muller that I would run for re-election. I was a little trepidatious because I thought, well, I could just do it for a few months and that's a good experience. But I ran for re-election, and this is a little more than midway through my first term on city council. And now I'll let Karen introduce herself.
So my name is Karen Sienko, and I'm second ward. So I'm newly elected. I was elected in April. And I am also a librarian, as Jake said. I work at the Oak Brook Public Library, so I'm in public librarianship. But I also used to work here at the Elmhurst Public Library up in adult services. So if you made it to the second floor, which a lot of you probably have, but sometimes parents don't make it up if they only go to the kids section. Then you might have seen me up there. And I used to teach some of the technology classes, the Canva and the Microsoft classes. So that's where you might have seen me before. My background in the city area is mostly with the PTA. So I'm very involved in, my son goes to Fisher. We're in the dual language program, and I was very involved in the PTA there, and I just wanted to get more involved. And so I decided to run and won my election. So now I'm here. Yep.
No surprise, of course.
Well,
so
it was a close race.
It was a close race, yes. And actually, my sister worked here. In fact, my whole family are librarians, my brother, my sister, and I. So coming here it's too much library. But anyway, moving on. So what are we going to talk about today? I'd like to be pretty good. I think after teaching enough that I'm not going to read every slide to you. I know you can probably read faster than I can talk, but I'll just touch on some of these extemporaneously. But we're going to talk about basically all the elected bodies that are involved with the city of Elmhurst. And what is the process? You know, when you complain about people speeding on your block, what happens with that complaint? Where can it go? What does it go to a committee? Do you call the city manager? Do you complain to a police officer? And in some cases, all those answers are not incorrect, but we'll talk about the process it usually follows. One other thing for the people playing along at home is that right before this session started, I did ask my in-person audience to fill out a slip of paper, which they can deposit in the jack-o'-lantern bowl in the back. And what we're going to do at the end is pull out your suggestions. I asked people in the audience to think about things they'd like to see happen in the city, or suggestions, or issues, or problems. And what we'll do is near the end, we're going to go through those slips and we'll say how we think those questions will be addressed. Which one of these processes would they go through? Would they go to a city council meeting? Would they first start with a commission? Would they bypass all that? Would they start with fire and police? You know, where would be the starting point? So first off, let's talk about the way in which the city is organized. We have a lot of aldermen here in Elmhurst. And by the way, I'm going to use the term alderman. It's been asked many times. Do people prefer alder people, aldermen, alder women? The issue is still undecided. So I may go back and forth between all of them, as the case may be. But we have a sitting mayor, of course, Mayor Scott Levin, and 14 aldermen divided into 7 wards. And these 7 wards are supposed to approximately represent each about 1/7 of the city households. And you can see, even though that some wards are bigger than, like you can see Ward 2, for instance, one of the largest wards, but we have a large amount of commercial land zoned in our ward. So the size does not so much matter as the way the population borders are drawn. And we look at those every 10 years with the 10-year census. And we operate under a city manager form of government, which means that in addition to a mayor, we have a city manager who manages the staff and oversees day-to-day operations. whereas the mayor functions as the head of the city council of 14 aldermen. He or she does not cast a vote, by the way, on city council unless there is a tie. And when there's a tie on city council, that's usually a pretty important vote to cast. But of course, you see Mayor Levin at many public events, a lot of groundbreakings, a lot of celebratory events, a lot of city participation events. So it's very much the public face along with the aldermen of the city. So how do you find out who your elected officials are? This is something that I found really helpful when I first started because I never knew who any of them were. I tried not to follow politics back then, and I did a pretty good job. But the county does have a address district search where you can look up and see who is your actual county representative, who's your state representative, who's your aldermanic representative, I believe. I haven't used this for alderman, but it should show every single elected official that's relevant to your address. I don't know, has anybody ever tried this resource? Again, this is at the county website. It's a little buried, but you can also just Google who is my elected official. There are several platforms you'll go to. This is if you happen to put in your county or your city, it usually brings you to this one. Let's talk a little bit about the elected officials and city staff and how they interact here. So as I said before, we have 14 elected officials, plus we also have a treasurer who is elected and a city clerk who is elected. So really we have more than 14, and of course the mayor. So a total of 17. And all of our wonderful headshots, whether we like them or not, and our contact information is available on the city website, which by the way, just got a facelift. Did anybody notice that with the new website? We're very proud of it. It's very, very green. It's got a new font. We have an official city font. So if you don't know what ward you're in, there is also a ward map on the city website, and it will, right now, I believe, I don't think there's an address lookup there. I think you just have to, know where you are in the city of Elmhurst, and you know what your ward boundaries are. But our contact information is all up here, and this is our real contact information, our real phone numbers. We are, of course, as representatives of you, as articulating your interests, right? That's the job of one of the jobs of somebody on council is to articulate their ward's interests, concerns, to be representative, right? So we respond to phone calls, we respond to texts, we respond to even knocks on the door. We're not shy about saying where we are. We always try to respond to emails as well, but many times we'll also redirect you if we don't think it's the right place. But all of us and our term expirations are up there. I think we'll be saying this again elsewhere, but in each ward, the aldermen's terms, elected terms, they overlap. They're not they're not going along at the same path. We are 2 years separated. So there's always continuity in a ward. There's always somebody who is senior, I guess, although after a while that's academic, and somebody who might be coming on. So every 2 years, as part of the general election, we'll have either our incumbent win or a new person come on. For a long time in our ward, we had, for over a decade, we had the same 2 aldermen who ran for several terms. And only recently has our ward turned over. However, different wards have had much more or much less turnover. I think we had 4 new elected officials this election. So a good amount. I guess. Yeah, 4. Yeah. Trying to think. No one, treasurer. Yeah. 4 elected officials. So what terms do we serve? So it's a 4-year term. I just said that. The mayor also serves a 4-year term. We have the city treasurer and city clerk serving their 4-year terms. And again, our aldermen are on 4-year alternating terms. So every 2 years, we should have 7 aldermen coming up for election. We also have people that are appointed by the council as administrative officials. And we have our city manager, who is we have a long-term city manager here. I've never worked under a different one. His name is Jim Grabowski. And they function not only as somebody who manages the staff and liaises with fire and police and public works and all the forestry and all the other divisions, but they also serve as a resource for the aldermen. So when we have a question, and we have a lot of questions, I mean, we learn on the job. And, it's something where typically it's, in terms of hours we put in a week, it's usually about, I don't know, I would say about, on the dais, which is sitting in city council chambers, probably around 2 hours a week. But that's not all we do for our $182 a month. We do much more time in terms of researching issues, because we also participate in committees. We're also generating reports. We're also talking to other staff members, and we call all these administrative officials, our city manager, our assistant city manager. Because I serve on public safety, I often talk to our fire chief and chief of police. They sit in on our committee meetings. Karen speaks to the director of public works, who sits in on her committee meetings all the time. Dave Oberg, the director of our history museum, actually sits in on public affairs and safety as well. So all these administrative officials will sit in on our meetings and offer their perspective. And many times when you as residents have concerns, we will either ask the city manager ourselves or direct you. If it's an issue like flooding, we may ask you to talk to one of these officials. We're happy to translate, but sometimes, as often the case, when you have a question, it gets very deep very quickly. Do you remember the flooding that happened on Gladys Road in 1982? Well, it's happening again. I'm like, all right, when was the big flood? 1987, right? And I'll say, I remember the flood of 87, but I wasn't in Elmhurst. So no, I don't know, but I'm going to turn to one of my administrative officials and ask about that. And maybe also the history museum, if it happened long ago enough. So we often use these as information resources. So again, the city manager, I'll briefly go over these. He's appointed by the council. He's our chief administrative officer. A picture of Jim Grabowski right here, and reminds us of code and the process that things go through in terms of working with the city. Like, where do we start with a particular issue? What's the history? Has anybody brought this up before? What was the response last time? Do you know what other municipalities are doing? So that's what the city manager does. And he is definitely the person I would say we contact the most easily on a regular basis, probably at least once a week. And then we have our chief of police, Michael McLean, who was just appointed, I believe, last year when Chief Ruth passed away, sadly. And our fire department chief, who was just appointed, Fire Chief Dick Dufort, which is a long-term veteran of the fire department. And so we work with these people as elected officials all the time. They sit in on committees. They sit in on our council meetings. We may, from the dais, ask a question to them, which they may be required to answer. If it's something we might know, we might refer to them and say, oh, yes, I see the chief is in the audience. Chief, do you have any more information about that? Or sometimes we'll say, I'm going to talk to the chief after this council meeting and we'll come back to this. So these are great resources for us. And they're resources, again, that we may direct you to. So if you have a question about crime, what is crime? What's the trends for crime in Elmhurst? We have an annual report. I can point you to that annual report. But if you have specific questions about crime, like how many of those speed trailers do we have? I happen to know, well, I'll wait if I put myself on the spot. I believe we have one, and then we have 2 of those speed pole lighted signs. And if you want one of those back, we can ask for you. But in the small town governance model, you can also call the chief of police and express your concerns. And that contact information is available on the city website. However, we're also here to do that for you. So we're happy to do it and give you our 2 cents on the issue while we're doing it. Here's a fascinating organizational chart. There'll be a quiz on this at the end. So please have it memorized in the next few seconds. But what I want to show you is that we have a lot of employees here that work for the city. And we typically, as aldermen, work with department heads or assistant department heads, or I should say directors or assistant directors, Sometimes we approach specific people, but we have a lot of employees. I should have learned the number for that before I came here. You don't happen to know the exact. It's a lot of employees spread out among several sites. Of course, both of our fire stations, we have two, our police station, the public works facility, which is off 83. And if you don't know where that is, if you drive an 83, sometimes you can smell the treatment plant near it, but it's close to Salt Creek Elementary over there on the little frontage road that runs along. Well, it's a little farther back, but Public Works is over there. And but you know, I want you to notice what's not on this, and this often happens. We get questions that are related to parks, right? And if it's not a code issue where it's like noise, or if it's not a crime issue, like there's vandalism occurring in the park district is a separate elected body here in Elmhurst. So if it's a park district related question, we'll probably refer you to the park district, and that happens from time to time. Also, school board. You know, we have a school board here, so school related questions. We are very careful, I think, in Elmhurst, not to weigh in on other elected bodies, as we would not want them to do to us, right? We'd rather they refer the person directly to us so we can give them our opinion of it. But having 3 elected bodies in Elmhurst, you know, sometimes you might feel like you're being juggled around, but that's not intentional. It's just the model, but they are not on this. And that's an important thing to note. Any questions about the organizational chart? Yeah, and we're pretty far up there. So what do we do on city council? So we're the legislative body, right? We make code adjustments, we make policies. You've heard of some of these that we've addressed most recently. Hoop houses was a very big one in Elmhurst, right? And we came up for policies for allowing hoop houses in Elmhurst. If there are variations or conditional uses on property that fall outside our normative code, excuse me, then we will hear those and say, is this something that we're going to permit with a structure or use in Elmhurst? So we also approved the budget, which is going on right now. And if you want to hear some exciting city council meetings, please come. We go till 10. These are very late ones. Knock on wood that we stop at 10, but we go over the entire budget. We look at long-term plans, like long-term downtown use, like a master plan. We look at other business districts. We look at surface projects, infrastructure projects. We even look at things like art. The Public Arts Commission is part of this, right? That reports to us. So there's parking is another common issue. Traffic, of course, is one of the biggest ones. And I can say, should I speak for you, Alderwoman, that I think traffic is probably our #1 concern that we hear about. So we are busy enough with this that the city manager serves to fulfill all those administrative responsibilities, right? And managing HR and all the different departments within the city. We also determine all the finance issues. I don't speak to finance much because I have never served on finance committee, but you'll see why maybe often when I get a finance question, I'll either ask somebody that serves on that committee, or I'll say I'm waiting to hear their report, because city council will report, a committee will report to all of city council when a report is generated on a particular issue. So often we're waiting just like you for answers, although we can ask questions, as can you. What is the role of the mayor here? So they preside at city council meetings. They run Robert's Rules of Order. Would anybody like a fun demonstration of Robert's Rules of Order? That's a trick question. There is no fun demonstration of Robert's Rules of Order, but it is a deliberative process that both a lot of civic and social organizations and legislative bodies and my university faculty council, we use that as well. And it is a very deliberative process that allows issues to be raised, to be voted on, to be approved, to even be amended, or to present what's known as a minority report if the majority disagrees with the minority on a committee. It sounds dry. It actually proves to be very interesting following the process, how the votes fall sometimes. I'm not going to say Robert's Rules is fascinating, but so the mayor presides at those meetings, and I would say serves as the parliamentarian. They direct us to follow the Robert's Rules of Order if we're out of out of line with what we should be doing. They also appoint members of commissions and advisory boards and working groups. You may have heard of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Working Group. That's a new one that we just appointed last year. That is helping us promote pedestrian and bicycle activities in Elmhurst. They do bike rides even in the winter all around here, getting people enthusiastic about biking, about running, about using the Elmhurst trails. So the mayor will appoint all those, sometimes with our advice. The mayor assigns aldermen to committees based upon their preferences and their abilities. They do a lot of our communication, outgoing communication, and also really helps us understand there's a lot of institutional knowledge with a mayor that has worked their way up through council. I'm not saying that I don't appreciate sometimes if you shake things up and have somebody that has not gone through that process. I haven't served under that sort of mayor, but I think there's a real benefit to having somebody that has a lot of the institutional history, right? So they also help us set goals. They can bring in consultants and advisors and advocating for some of our policy decisions. That is the mayor's pay right there. I can tell you Mayor Levin he's way underpaid in terms of his time he puts in. I think he treats it off, this is my opinion, he treats it like a full-time job. It takes up a lot of his time. So I think you have to enjoy it. If you're interested in being mayor or ever running, you have to enjoy being mayor. It has to be something that I think you want to do. And I mentioned that they do not have a vote at city council unless there is a tie, which has happened once in the past 2 years, I believe. Feel free. I mean, you can quiz. I believe it happened about 2 years ago. So relatively early on in his first full term. What's the role of the city clerk? So our city clerk sits in at every council meeting. They maintain the minutes that we vote on and approve, right? Which are very important. I think minutes sometimes can be the only record of what somebody said on an issue a long time ago. For instance, one of the issues before one of our committees now is chicken coops. Now, no matter how you feel about chicken coops, it's not the first time we've talked about chicken coops, surprisingly. So going back and looking at the minutes and seeing when it's been discussed before, or a related issue, beekeeping, which is allowed in Elmhurst. I wonder what they said back then. And you have to go back and look at the minutes and read. And these minutes are sometimes not as in depth as you would like, but they do have, the major points raised by people serving on a committee or council. The clerk keeps a record of all that, reads aloud the agenda, attests to resolutions, and seals and attests to all contracts of the city. They do other things that are like a little opaque to us because they don't happen on the dais. When we say on the dais, then we mean at an official meeting at city council. That's their compensation, and they have a deputy clerk on staff who presides when they are not available. We have a city treasurer, Dan Curran, the custody and disbursement of funds. He may make investment decisions and may make other recommendations with respects to the budget from time to time. Certainly at budget time, we all turn to him. Our current treasurer ran unopposed, and he's an accountant and excellent city treasurer. I've never had any other though, so I would have to say he seems to do a good job. Aldermen or alder people or alderwomen. We again represent our residents within our ward and then the whole city. We can't only represent our ward. We have to represent also what's best for all of Elmhurst. Do you need to live in your ward? Yes. What if you move out of your ward? You're no longer an alderman. You're going to have to run again in your new ward. What if you have a house elsewhere? That's fine, but it can't be your primary residence. You have to live in the ward in which you represent. And again, that's our annual compensation. It's funny because I think sometimes people don't realize that, in some ways it'd be better if we got paid nothing, because $182, I don't think is really moving the needle. I think that's been our rate of pay for like 20 years. And it would almost be better to say we don't get paid anything. We volunteer our time. But no, we do get paid $182 a month. So How do you contact us? I showed us all the contact form that's available on the city website. Our phone numbers are our real phone numbers. There's the actual URL in case you want to copy it down or you're watching this, the recorded version. And you can email us 24 hours a day. We will get back to you when we can. Of course, I would say that I think almost all the people on council have either part-time or full-time jobs. I have other things I do in addition to that. So, but I will get back to you if you contact me. There's another service that we use a lot, and I don't know, have any of you heard of this? It's called Elmhurst Connect. Maybe some of you. I like to mention this a lot because sometimes when you call me with a problem, what I do is I open the Connect link on my phone and I just put it in Elmhurst Connect. So when you see a pothole, for instance, and you say, Alderman, I see there's a, well, you can just call me Jake, I see a pothole. It's over on, let's pick another street, Fremont. It's on Fremont. I see this pothole on Fremont. Can you do something about it? Because it's a liability. I'm like, sure. So I could call the director of public works, or I could call the traffic engineer, I could call the city manager, but I'll probably fill out an Elmhurst Connect form. And that's because it tracks the issue, creates a ticket, and there's accountability. I mean, there's always accountability, but it circles back. So I will put this in for you. Do you need me to put it in for you? Not necessarily. I'm happy to do it. But when I put it in, by the way, I put mine in anonymously because I don't want them to know it's for me. I do that as a test. It's always passed. But I put these in and they treat me very well. I always get a follow-up. And I would say the service is exemplary through Elmhurst Connect, right? Exemplary, yeah. What other communication methods do we have? One common complaint we've gotten is that we don't do enough to reach residents. And it's hard because all of you have different communication methods. I ask my students, who watches the TV news at home? What's that? Who watches TV news? Anyone here? Who reads the paper? All right. Who maybe watches a podcast on the internet or something for their news? Our students do none of those things. And where they get their news from? Facebook, what comes on, maybe. Facebook's a little uncool now, so maybe they'll look on some social media. So they don't even look at any of those traditional forms of communication. So what works for one group does not work for another. I don't want to get my news through Snap. I have my own preferred channels, but I also don't get a paper anymore. So we mail out a newsletter called The Front Porch that goes out to the entire city. This comes out, is it bi-monthly or quarterly? Quarterly, thank you. And I believe we also have an electronic version available. And this does have a lot of our important updates plus a message from the mayor. We have city news. Of course, we have a Facebook, City of Elmhurst Facebook social media channel. We also have City e-news that you can sign up for on the website. And we also have the Code Red program, which will notify you. It basically is a way for fire and police to notify you of events in your area should you wish to be updated. I have heard they are changing some things in that Code Red system. I'm not sure what the replacement is yet, but I believe that's coming. If you're awake late at night and you can't fall asleep, I encourage you to read the Elmhurst Municipal Code. It's a page turner. I have to read it sometimes. So, but it does have, and we will often refer to that code. It is updated on a regular basis. And it is, again, as librarians, we refer to it all the time. My colleague is great at referring to it. City council meetings. So we meet every Monday, unless there's a holiday, then we meet on a Tuesday or some other special event. For instance, next week, we're meeting on a Monday for our city council meeting. Tuesday, we're having what's called a committee of the whole meeting. We're going to Arlington Heights to check out their performing arts center in advance of having one here. So we're seeing how that integrates with the city of Arlington Heights, and they're hosting us. But it is a public meeting if you want to come along to Arlington Heights. I believe they're having a presentation. Details are on the city website. That would fall under bullet point number 2. Special meetings are held as needed. But we have city council meetings the first and third Monday of the month at 7:30 every time. And then the second and fourth Mondays of the month, we have our committee meetings. So the 14 aldermen are organized into 4 committees. 4 doesn't go into 14 well, so there's 3 on some committees, 4 on others. But those are our committee meetings. We'll talk about that in a second. The city agenda is also always posted on Thursday in advance by 5 p.m. So today, just a couple hours ago, 2.5 hours ago, Monday's agenda was posted on the platform called Board Docs. Board Docs is a separate resource that's linked from our city website. Again, it's kind of dry. It's an agenda. It has the documents attached to reports. It has ordinances. It might have written comment if there's something from the public. Quorum is an interesting concept. So because of many rules that govern the legislative process in Illinois, we cannot meet unless we have quorum. Quorum is defined as one more than half of an existing body. This becomes very important. I'll get to that in a second. So we have 14 on city council, really 15, but one doesn't cast a vote, 14 unless there's a tie. So half of that is 7. So quorum, the minimum for us to meet is 8. So we cannot, and in this case, it actually does include the mayor because it's 15. So if it was 16, it would be 9. All right. So, but with 15, and by the way, the treasurer and the city clerk do not count in that quorum setting because they do not have any vote at any time. So that count as part of quorum. So we cannot meet if there's less than 8. I've never seen that happen, but it's possible. Sometimes we have delayed a meeting, especially around Christmas time, if we think enough of us are going to be out of town that we will not have quorum. I said that our meeting is governed by rules, Robert's Rules of Order, yays and nays, or we can recuse ourselves from a vote. And if we are, involved with something like maybe, I'm trying to think of, there was something related to the Elmhurst University that was talked about in my committee. I recused myself from that vote because I'm an employee. So I already said, we also have, I think this might be mentioned on another slide, but all of our meetings are open to the public, except for some called executive sessions. I think we'll get to that. What are executive sessions? They're closed session meetings. For a number of reasons we can have them, but they're to cover sensitive topics, right? Usually related to pay and compensation, or selling of real estate. We wouldn't want to have that discussion in public if we're trying to set a price, because then somebody would know our best price versus our hoped for price. So these have to happen. These have to happen behind closed doors. But we do take minutes on those, and occasionally they are released. We have to vote to keep them sealed. All of our meetings follow Open Meeting Acts. This is actually something that's kind of dry but fascinating. We talk about it all the time. So that says we can't talk about things that we would vote on except in certain situations. So we have to give you advance notice of a meeting. We have to post it out there on Thursdays. We have to say we're meeting. And generally, 8 of us can't get together. Actually, it's half of that. So it's a quorum of a quorum. Because without going into the weeds, let's say only 8 of us made it to the city council meeting. Well, if 5 of us got together and talked about an issue, then we would have the majority, right? And then we could sway the vote on that. So we can't talk about things in groups of 5 ever. That if it's on the city, I mean, we can talk about other things, but we can't talk about things that are on our agenda, right? Or things that are in the process. We can't talk about things we're deliberating on. So you will see that no alderman talks about things in group of 5. You see 5 aldermen together, that's fine, but they're not discussing things that are on the agenda because they would, in effect, have a voting block that would sway the final vote, theoretically. That's what we're told to do. So I think we're going to get to that. I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but we're making sure that no meeting is held on a legal holiday. We have to make it accessible and available. There are only certain circumstances, like I said, executive session, where we would close the meeting. Also, if we feel like we have not given adequate meeting time for the public to weigh in on an issue, we will often move an issue ahead to the next meeting so that we give the public time to do that. We just had this with an alley issue. We added another meeting to give the public more time to weigh in. We want some more input from the community. We all complete OMA training. And again, we use the board docs portal to follow many of the rules of OMA. You know, when we talk about things, we have to follow those rules, whether it's face-to-face or virtual. So it is very sometimes difficult for us to talk, or we have to make sure we're not breaking into the Open Meeting Act rules. And I'll tell you that we work very hard to follow them, because the last thing we want to do is be found in violation of any of these, because many of us are amateurs at it. We're always worried that, you know, we're saying the wrong. Sometimes if I feel like it, even when we could talk about things, we don't, because we're waiting for that next meeting to happen. Is that a fair thing to say? Okay. So these are some of the things that we can talk about behind closed doors. Compensation and employment of city employees, purchaser sale of real estate, and litigation, right? Because that's going to, again, go before an appointed or elected official in the court system. And that is something where we can deliberate behind closed doors. Sometimes that's also for the protection of the individuals involved, right? You know, if we're talking about somebody that's a staff member or something, we don't want to release those unless the staff member or the employee would want that information released. So litigation is typically talked about behind closed doors. This is the Board Docs platform, which lists all our meetings. Have anybody seen Board Docs? So if you don't know how to get to it, there is the URL. You won't write down, because I don't either. I just Google Board Docs Elmhurst. You might want to throw the word city in there, because the school board also has a Board Docs platform. But if you put in Board Docs Elmhurst, you'll also get to this, and you'll see our most recent meetings. We have some listed. Walking away from the camera for a second, we have some listed on the side here. I don't know when those meetings were, probably a few. Oh, wow. 2017. That shows how old our slides are. So, but these will have everything that's on the agenda for the meeting. And so if you're like, maybe you have an issue that's important to you, you want to hear about a flooding issue, you can check the agenda for the week. And now you know that committee meetings are on the 2nd and 4th Mondays of the month. And you can go to the Public Works Committee and you can check their agenda. Or you can just call your alderman and we will do all that research for you, because that's one of the things we do a lot. Is this issue being discussed? We'll say, let me check, and we'll log into Board Docs too. No, I don't think so. So when we have city council meetings, we have to be recognized to speak as part of Robert's Rules of Order. So we have to agree to have speakers come in. We have to be recognized by the mayor to speak in a meeting. The only exception to that, where we can have unsolicited comment from like people outside of Elmhurst, or within Elmhurst, I mean, where it's not like some consultancy group or other body reporting to us, that has to be done with our consent. Like we just had the Illinois Tollway Authority come in and talk to us about, you may have noticed they're closing things around here lately on streets. So they gave us an update of what's going on with the tollway construction. So they had the consent of the council to come in and address us. But during public forum, I don't know if this talks about public forum is an incredibly powerful tool. I can't stress enough that you as citizens and me as a citizen, public forum is heard by your council people. We hear you. We by tradition do not react to your comments unless we may ask a point of clarification. But for 3 minutes, you have our ears and we do hear those comments. And in many ways, when I was coming up and addressing my flooding concern in my neighborhood, I found that aldermen would talk, when I contacted them after the meeting, they would remember me and they would remember the issue I raised. And another thing that I like about public forum is you don't have to be reasonable all the time. You can be angry, you can show your emotion, you can speak loudly, you can speak with passion. you'll find that typically your council, as a council member, we don't do that as much. We have to sort of keep ourselves fairly reserved nominally. So it's a powerful tool at your disposal, and we love to have public forum comment. So you can also give us written comment. If you do have written comment, it goes into the record, and we also all read that. In fact, we get an advanced copy of it if you submit it early enough. Am I starting to step on? I think you're the next slide, or are we? Or okay. So with that, I've talked long enough. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague to cover committee meetings.
All right, so committee meetings. As Alderman Hill mentioned, we are broken into 4 committees, which are not all evenly spread out since there's 14 of us. But this is where a lot of the work is done. So where we have a lot more of our discussions. Committee meetings are held on the 2nd and 4th Mondays of the month. They start at 7, not 7:30, which I still find a little odd, but that's okay. Because it'd be nice from a scheduling point of view if they always start at the same time. But anyway, so we also have people who come from the public. They're open, so you can come for comments. You can also put in written comments as well. And we do have people. So I'm on the Public Works Committee, and we have people who come every meeting to state what they're passionate about, what they're interested in, and what's going on for them in their part of town. And again, these agendas come out. They're also posted on board docs in the same place. They'll just be listed out by the various committee meetings, and they're posted the Thursday before. So the 4 committees are Public Works and Buildings, Public Affairs and Safety, Finance, Council Affairs, Administrative Services, and then Development, Planning, and Zoning. So Public Works is where we tend to spend a lot of money. It is the committee that is responsible for things like streets, sanitation, sidewalks, forestry. You know, if a light goes out, a street light goes out, this is the group that's going to help you. Traffic control signals, not necessarily traffic control, that would be Public Affairs and Safety. Improvement to the water, sewers, municipal buildings, they handle all of this. All of the equipment that is used. So the trucks that you see, the tree trimming things, all of the equipment, snow removal, everything, all falls under Public Works and Buildings. So when I say they spend a lot of money, they spend a lot of money in this committee. For Public Affairs and Safety, this committee talks about a lot of the police department issues, any of the fire department issues, and then they also talk about some of the more fun stuff of the city. So cultural affairs, the museum, because the museum is part of the city. So Elmhurst History Museum is part of the city. The staff that work there are part of the city staff. Yeah, so the library has its own separate entity, but they are also city employees. Another big important committee is finance. They also, so this is where budgeting, appropriations, data processing, public improvements, all the financing that the city goes through. So the tax levy, all of the financial resources and revenues, all gets talked about here first. We recently just went through a large discussion around the water, what was it? Stormwater, yes. What was it called? Putting you on the spot. Yeah, so it was for the bond applications, and the stormwater bonds were coming due. And so the finance committee talked about that for quite a few months to come up with a resolution on how to pay for those. And then development, planning, and zoning is all about the decisions made around new developments. If there's anything that needs to be done for housing, or for exceptions. So if there's going to be a conditional use permit, if something goes through the zoning and planning commission first, and then comes to the development planning and zoning committee, they talk about that. But all these committees do a lot of the heavy lifting of council. This is where all the issues are kind of talked about and the reports are made before it goes to the council to vote on as a whole. And how some of that happens is through committee referrals. So if an idea, like if someone like you all or one of us has an idea that we think the council should look at in large, we create a referral. And that referral needs to be agreed upon by at least 2 council members. And it's usually something we write up and we, create a bit of flowery language and we create a little report that says, hey, we think this is a good idea and we would like someone to look into it or, move it forward. So one recent one was Alderman Hill and I and a few other alder people created a referral around the trolley lines and looking at different trolley stops and if we could incorporate trolley stops in a wider area of town. And so we wrote up a referral and we submitted that. And that takes on a process of going to the city manager, who then submits it to city council to determine if that should be something that the city council wants to look into. And then it gets assigned to a committee. And then once it gets assigned to a committee, that committee can take it up to discuss it or not. And it kind of sits there for a little while until someone takes it on. Committee reports. Committee reports are the items that have either been referred or items for discussion. So if staff comes to us and says, hey, we need to purchase a new police car or purchase a new truck or something, or we're going to televise the sewer lines, they will create a report as to who's going to do the work, what the bids were, and the whole process that they went through and what it's going to cost. And that report then summarizes the whole process. And then the committee will vote on whether or not that will be done. And then we would sign off on it if we vote yes. And then it goes to the council to then vote as well. Alderman Hill mentioned the majority and minority reports. These come into play if the committees don't agree. So if you have a committee where maybe 2 people or half don't agree, for the majority and the minority can write their own report and say, hey, I didn't like this approach and we think we should go with, a different contractor or we should go with a different process. And then both those reports would then go to the council for them to discuss as a whole. So here's a little bit more about the referral process. So an issue is identified by an alderman. 2 to 4 aldermen must sign on to that referral issue for it to go to city council. Council votes, it sends it to a committee. The committee debates the issue, sends it back to city council, and then city council debates the issue and votes. And if approved, then it could become an ordinance or a resolution. But if a referral is not acted on by the committee, it has until the April 30th of the odd numbered year. So it could have up to 2 years to be looked at. And that way, things just don't languish out there forever. And it's only taken up by the current council.
Yeah, and I think there's something important to add to that is that the chair of each committee has they have a chair. Each committee has a chair appointed by the mayor, a chair and a vice chair. I'm the vice chair of public affairs, for instance. But the chair of each committee has the prerogative of what to put on that week's agenda. So sometimes we have residents that have a concern about something and they're like, well, I've been following this along. I see that Alderman Hill and Sienko put in a referral. How come it isn't being talked about? And most of the time it's because there may be something that's time sensitive that has to be, we have to get the police car order in, right? Or we have to approve the grant for this upcoming community event. So many times, not intentionally, an issue that is there is pending, but it's not, it's frustrating because like, when is that going to be decided? Do you have any news? And we're like, no, we're waiting. You know, there's a lot of things that have to be done. And this was considered usually, you know, sometimes our referral or somebody's referral might be of lower priority. If it's high priority, usually the chair tries to slate it early on, but that doesn't always happen.
Right. Yeah, no, that's fine. It's a better explanation. So, okay. All right, boards and commissions. All right, so we have 14 boards and commissions in the city of Elmhurst. A board or commission, these are appointed commissions or bodies that are appointed by the mayor. So the people on these groups are appointed for their positions. They're people who have expressed interest and they apply and they can be appointed. But we have 14 of them in the city, which for some cities of our size is some cities have more or less. It just, these are the ones that have become an interest of ours for the different areas that they serve. Although, yeah, so the Public Arts Commission is on here, the Historic Preservation Commission, which is different than the Historic Foundation. And then some, to be on the commission, you do need to have certain experience or other things. So like the Architectural and Building Commission, that is usually architects and people who have engineering backgrounds, because they look at very specific things within our architecture and building and things. And then the fire and police pension, or I'm sorry, yes, the firemen's and pension funds are usually also ones who have very specific backgrounds to serve on those commissions or boards as well. So, but one commission that you probably hear a lot about is the Zoning and Planning Commission. So their primary responsibility is to represent the long-term public interest of the city and to, excuse me, they discuss the planning or zoning issues that are important to the community. They are the ones that also get charged with when someone applies for a variance or a conditional use permit to do something on their property that they would like to do that's outside of the norm. It goes to the ZPC first, and they look at all of our comprehensive plan and our zoning regulations and the different planning criteria to determine if that conditional use permit can be granted. And that is before it goes to the planning or the committee of alder people to then look at it. But they look at it against all of the criteria that we have for conditional uses and things like that. But they're also the, so if someone has gotten a, let's say, unfavorable determination and they don't like it, then they can go back and appeal. And then this is the Commission of Appeal. So when they go back, this is the group of people that they would go back and appeal to. So they also serve in that aspect as well. So other elected bodies in Elmhurst, as Alderman Hill had mentioned, we have the Park District, we have the School Board, we have the DuPage County Board, we have township boards if you're in Addison or York. We also have the Forest Preserve Board and others. I'm sure there are many others that you could run for. So now we are on to questions.
You are random picks here.
Sure.
Let's
Let's
see.
do a random pick.
So let's see. Actually, could you go back to that? I think it's like slide 4 or 5 that has all the table of organization.
Sure. Five.
That might be useful for our. There we go.
Okay.
Okay, this fascinating organizational chart. My question pulled at random is, how do you look so young as alderman? No, it's how is road resurfacing decided and scheduled? So what would we do with that question? I'm going to, I think I can I let you have this one?
Sure. I can
Okay.
take this
Where
one.
would it go?
So I would reach out to our Public Works Director, Stan Balicki, on this one.
Would you start with your alderman, or if you knew better? would you-
So I would start with Mel
Okay.
and have them reach out. Cause yeah.
So
Mm,
if you wanted to, we would definitely
Yeah.
put you in contact with, actually, you probably would end up being in contact with the Director of Public Works. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. The question was, why would we not encourage the citizen to reach out directly to the Director of Public Works? And the answer is probably actually eventually we would do that. If it was a very simple question that we could get the answer from the director,
Yeah.
we would summarize it and provide it to you. But if you had follow-on questions, then we
Yeah.
would encourage you.
Yeah.
Okay. Traffic light timing on St. Charles at York Route 33.
Right.
Route 83 at St. Charles. Oh, I've offered one to this one myself. Traffic light timing. So that's an interesting one because Route 83 is not our road. It is I think it's a township road, isn't it? State road, right? State. There's township roads, there's IDOT roads. Different authorities have jurisdiction over roads. St. Charles is our road when it's, no, that's an IDOT road too, isn't it? I know North Avenue is. You can see we don't know. So probably, again, you could reach out to your alderman. So yeah, it's not our ward. We don't know.
Is there
So-
a place to check like who owns what road? I was just going to put a link in the chat if there is a place online where you can just check who owns what road.
I don't know.
I am not aware of that resource,
Okay.
although I bet the owners of the road would have it on a map.
You'd hope so, right?
But
Who
right.
owns this road?
Exactly. But what we would do is we would probably start out with our traffic engineer, which is on there under, let's see, Public Works. So under streets would be our traffic engineer, Kent Johnson, who would give us an answer on that.
Yeah.
Again, would you want to talk to Kent Johnson directly? You certainly could, but that would be something that would start. Now, if you wanted to change the timing, we would probably talk to that traffic engineer first and say, can we change the timing on this road? Is it our road? Are we allowed to do that? What's the state standards for timing at these intersections? Because believe me, we do it for a reason, even though it seems like a very long light sometimes. But there is reasons why the timing is set when it is. So we would try to find out the answer if we had any control over that. Have something like Citizens Police Academy, but a combination of fire department and public works. Ooh,
Oh.
so go. So you would probably start with your alder people and see if we could put in a referral for you. If we think, if you convince us that that's something that is a good idea, and even if you don't, right, you could also bring that to public comment. I would do that.
Well, there already is a Public Works
There
Academy,
is.
and it's held in the spring. And I think it's 5 weeks long. But there is not a fire department academy.
I want one.
You do?
That'd be cool.
You just want to go in the tower.
I want to ride in the engine.
Yeah.
That would be.
Okay.
I have brought up a fire, actually that's one of those ideas. Sometimes we feel like there's such a lot of things on the council agenda that we're waiting on an item to put in when things slow down a little bit, because there's a lot of things going on and we know it won't be heard for a while. So we'll wait until some of those issues are addressed. But or sometimes we just have to talk to other aldermen and convince one to go on the referral with us.
Yeah.
Because you have to convince at least one other alderman that it's a good idea and that they would support it.
Right.
We're going till just, is it okay if we answer one or two more?
I do have some Zoom questions as well, if we want to maybe pivot to the Zoom folks and then go back to the in-person.
Sure.
So the first question, it actually came in pretty early. This is not me, obviously. I'm reading as the person who asked the question. I am a scout from Troop 117. Can we increase the park district budget to build a water park at one of the pools? What is the process for this? And then a follow-up question, how can young people help support a water park?
I'll let you take.
Good question. I would love if my boys could go to a water park. We do have the splash park, but it's not quite the same. So with that, I could do one of two things. You could reach out to your alderperson and we could contact the park district elected official. We would usually tell them the resident's concern and encourage them to reach out to the resident, because we don't know. We don't know what the process would be for the budget to, or if there's like land use restrictions or hygiene. Right. They might have a plan for a water park. And in that case, yes, that is something that we would refer to the park district.
Sounds good. And this is actually a really good follow-up. Is the park district part of Elmhurst city governance or an independent entity? And I think on one of those bottom slides, it implied it was kind of an independent entity, but maybe you could speak more to that relationship.
It is one of the three elected bodies in Elmhurst. So it is part of elected governance within the city, but not part of the city of Elmhurst elected governance. I feel like I said the same thing two different ways, but it's not part of the city of Elmhurst. It is an elected body within Elmhurst.
All right, I have just one more Zoom, so I figure since you're going through them so fast. This person says, I think the city could do better in communicating major utility work, new gas lines as example. I'll sort of add on to what they said there, which is where would residents be able to keep apprised of major utility work such as new gas lines? Is that something that would be, through the Front Porch newsletter or through any of those like e-news options that you mentioned earlier in the presentation?
Yeah, it's just about your public works. Okay. So utilities are hard because they don't necessarily have to keep us apprised of the work that they're doing. I mean, they have some restrictions on how they have to keep us apprised, but they don't. I'm not sure of what the exact communication lines are. I do know that's something I would ask the city manager, because the city manager does have contacts with all the major utilities in Elmhurst, but often the first thing I hear about major utility work on my street is when I see it. So it is not. And I don't think that's what anybody in Elmhurst wants. I think we would like advance notice of that. But I think sometimes the communication lines may happen, but too late for the residents to be notified in advance. Sometimes the alderman will get a notice, very rarely, that there is utility work going on, and we'll try to notify our residents. But how do we notify our residents? I don't have an email list of even a quarter of the people in my ward. I do have a Facebook page and I do put it on there. And in certain cases, we can try to reach a wider audience with the City of Elmhurst Facebook page. But again, how many of you check your Facebook all the time? And if you're under 20, you don't have a Facebook page anymore because that's not cool. So yeah, hope that answers it.
So that's the last of our Zoom questions. So if you want to pivot to the bucket, as for how long we were going, I figure maybe until 8:15 if you guys are willing to, or I mean, I'm not too flexible. I just need to make sure that the room's closed down by 9. So as long as you guys are willing to go.
Well, before we go back to the bucket, I just want to ask the audience that's come out, are there any general questions that aren't in this bucket that we can answer for you? I have a few questions. Sir.
Well, I'm a retired pension actuary, so my session is how are the city employee pension funds funded? Are they adequately funded? I noticed one of your committees was the police and fire pension. Is there enough money in those pension funds?
So we're looking at the pension funds. Oh, thank you. Does the city of Elmhurst budget enough for city employee pensions, fire, police, other city employees? And the answer, well, first off, the question is a really good one because we're learning a lot about the budget. Part of going through the budget process every December is understanding how our obligations match up with our funding. Typically with those questions, I don't know the answers off the top of my head, but I would pivot to the treasurer or the finance committee, or probably the chair of the finance committee or the city manager. I will say though, that we have addressed this issue recently, and I expect that our funding obligations currently are more than adequate for the year's upcoming budget in terms of funding the pensions. I'd be happy to get your contact information and get a more nuanced answer to that. But on the spot, I don't know, because I would lean on some of these, or I'd email them and then they'd get back to me and say, well, of course, this is how it's funded. It's on page 20 or something like that. But I believe my last recollection is that our funding outlook is very good for this year. I hope. Yes.
Yes.
Full-time job. Is the city manager full-time job was the question.
It's about employment, pay, that's what goes, right? So then do you have a say about when Mark Stevens was hired to be the superintendent of forestry? Did you have a say in him being hired, or would you have a say in these other people being hired or not? Or
So it depends on the level. Generally, the city manager has a say and is involved with HR in all these decisions. And with certain positions, such as the chief or deputy chief or director, they will come with their selection and ask for the council's support on that. We can ask about compensation, but when we do that, we generally look at comparatives. And, you know, we want to be a city that people want to work for, right? So we have to pay competitively. And that drives, I think, the majority of the discussion about compensation for our employees. But generally, that's all done by the city manager, but asking for our support as a council. And we ask questions at that time and say, what are comparatives? What do you see as an appropriate funding level? What other sorts of benefits? So kind of both, right? We don't do it directly, but they want our support to move forward with it. They can move forward without universal support, but they look for consensus. I saw another question.
So I've been present here at the library for a couple of different elections, but when the city hires an outside agency to conduct a survey and
Some sort of consultation.
yeah, but these companies are getting paid very well, and considering what they're actually doing, I don't consider that to be very technical or any kind of expertise that the city couldn't actually do, or actually having another committee or something done for free, by the city, by the residents with experience and technical expertise that we have right here. Why is it that we rely so much on these outside agencies and paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to conduct their research?
That's a really good question. The question was, why do we rely upon what can be expensive outside agencies and consultants to make recommendations for city planning or other city services? For instance, I'll give you an example. We have a traffic study that's going on. I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but there is a traffic study being conducted in quadrants all across Elmhurst. First traffic study done in a long time. And then Elmhurst is going to be divided up into 12 or 14 quadrants. We've done one so far. That was the College View area because it had a high school and college in it. And last I heard, kids can drive fast. So they decided to do that one first. But now they're moving around and doing in other areas. Now, to answer your question, some of these projects are long-term projects. And so I don't know why those consultants were hired. I don't know the decision of the council at that time. Maybe it was before my time, but without dodging the question, I will say that with a lean staff, I know that we do rely on agencies we work with over the long term who kind of know our long-term planning and our comprehensive plan. We will go back to them and say, we don't have the expertise on our staff. We need to ask that this be examined. What would your fee be? We're paying, if we've never done a traffic study, and we can compile a lot of data, but we don't know what our best practices. We could possibly spend a lot of time on that and maybe create a new position for that. I know that we try to leverage like internships to do some of the legwork on that. But I think that when the city does reach out, many times we have to do that because we simply don't have the expertise at hand. That being said, it's a back and forth, though. We don't always agree that that's the case. And some of us on council have had questions about that. Is this something that needs to be done by a consultant? Is this something that maybe going forward we could do ourselves? So I don't want to look like our opinions are monolithic, all the same. We are asking those same questions too. But because many of these consultants are doing their studies over a number of months or years, sometimes we're not even aware of the ones that are in plan. We have to ask about them, find out more about it, and what was the decision at the time when that council looked at it. So I know it's not really an answer, but what I really want you to take away from it is that we have some of those same concerns as well. Like, do we need to hire consultants? Is this something we can do better or at least more affordably ourselves?
In-house, with the crossing guards throughout the city. I mean, they could be making recommendations. We have Citizens Police Academy, people getting involved and they can, identify certain things. I mean, they can even do their own little traffic studies, if you will, through whatever power you would grant them, police power. There's a scout who called in, there's a supporter troops. That could be doing this. I mean, there are so many things, and that's just for that one study that you're, talking about. I don't see, the point of having some outside agency conduct a traffic study. I mean, most residents can tell you who's speeding down, what streets.
Well, I think the thing that might be a little opaque about that is that they use a lot of data collecting equipment. You'll see them when the traffic study comes, and we don't own that equipment. And there would be costs there to lease it out and interpret and collate the data too. So they're doing a lot of data crunching for us. So that's something, could we learn to do that? Possibly. Could we buy or lease the equipment? It's also possible. But in many cases also, I think our recommendations for consultants come off of other successful studies that have been done elsewhere in other municipalities, right? We share this. So they have good results. And sometimes I think that's a good recommendation to take forward. But it's definitely something I think could be another larger conversation with the city manager. And I think that would be something, since I don't have all the answers on that one, that would be something maybe I could put you in contact with them, or you can reach out to them and find out a little bit more about it. Yeah, it's a good question.
I didn't have problem, but the adjudication, when you go to that, who exactly is the person that's presiding over that? And is he an actual lawyer or judge, or what capacity is he actually?
I don't know. I would have to ask the city manager on that. I assume it's a staff hearing officer. I don't believe off the top of my head that they serve in the judicial system, but they have the power at the city level to make those decisions, but I don't know.
So that was a question about the adjudication court that
Thank
was
you.
on the I actually don't see where the adjudication court is on the org chart here. Where is that under there? Just so I can make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page.
So I would think that would fall under community development, perhaps. Another good question. And these, if there was an issue with that, that'd probably be brought to my committee. but I have not dealt with something at the code enforcement level before, so I would have to rely on staff to tell me what the process is, but happy to find out, definitely. So again, the question was, what is the authority of our code enforcement official at City Hall? And I'm not sure. Any other questions before I circle back? One more time. Yes.
Ask their questions and have input and watch the committee meetings, the council meetings. Are those also accessible by Zoom? That people can
All the council meetings are recorded and accessible via Zoom. The committee meetings happen in small breakout rooms, which don't at this point have the interactive technology to turn them into Zoom rooms. I think it's been discussed before, but traditionally they have not been Zoom recorded. Traditionally, I don't know when city council meetings started being recording. It was a number of years ago, but right now only the council meetings are recorded. And committee of the whole, anything that happens that's the larger city council, I believe, is recorded in the larger room.
but not just record it, but interact in real time.
Oh, the audience cannot interact with the, except during the pandemic, we allowed it through public forum. But now for public forum, you do have to attend in person. And during the public forum stage, like what we're doing today, taking questions via Zoom, that's just because this is a non-formal city event here. So we'll take questions from those. But during a recorded meeting, it's not back and forth. We're just being recorded and all the public comment is being recorded, but you have to show up in person to do that or submit written comment if you cannot. Do you think there's a reason for that? I think it's representative, democracy. You kind of have to show up to make your comment and be in person. And I don't think it might be ideologically an official answer. I don't know the official answer, but I think we are encouraged as the public to show up and make our public comment in person. I mean, I'm in favor of it, but I don't know if there's any sort of ordinance or code that dictates it must be in person. And that's just tradition. Good
It's
question.
also possibly about anonymity and the level of anonymity that you could theoretically have online. Like I know that, sometimes Zoom gets brigaded and it would be the kind of thing where that would maybe be difficult to police. So I think maybe that could have a part of it as well.
If it helps, I know that no elected body does that right now in Elmhurst. That none of them solicit questions via Zoom, although during the pandemic, exceptions were made for that. Only aldermen may make referrals, yes, or staff may make a report that would also go to city. So there's two ways for something to go to city council. It'll either be alderman making a referral, the referral is approved by city council, and then it goes to the appropriate committee, or staff generate a report. They ask the chair to discuss it in committee, and then it goes to city council if approved. So a citizen that is not an elected official or part of the administrative staff cannot propose a report to be voted on at council. Well, you can make a suggestion in public comment, but for it to become part of the ordinance and code or policy of the city, it does have to be referred by an elected official, discussed at committee, approved by council, the referral, then discussed by committee, then approved at council. So it does have to follow that process.
I believe you also mentioned too that it needs to be like co-signed by another alderman or, seconded by another alderman to go through that. So it sounds like the citizen's best way is to bring the concern to the alderman. The alderman will try to rally support around it, and then it'll be discussed by that larger group. It sounds like is what you're getting at.
Right. And if that sounds like a lengthy process, it is, but I will say that many of our referrals come from citizens. Why can't we do this? There should be a stop sign here. Oh, well, maybe we should put in a referral to get a stop sign. Or maybe we should limit construction times. Maybe we should put in a referral to limit construction times. These are just examples, so on and so forth. Many of our referrals come from the public. So, I mean, I think it's just a multi-step process to make sure it's vetted, you know, not just in the interest of one citizen or one ward, but all of Elmhurst by representative government. So I think with that, we're probably going to wrap it up. I really appreciate all the questions and listening to us drone on. I mean, I know we try to be entertaining, but I don't know if we're an hour and a half's worth of entertaining, but feel free to watch us and talk to us at any time. You know, our faces, Jacob Hill, Karen Sienko, 2nd Ward, but we're happy to talk to you about any ward and tell you about your alderman and, you know, other ways in which you can navigate the city structure. And I don't know when we'll be doing this again, but we always rotate, but it's nice for the participation. Thank you for coming out.
Thanks so much for coming, everybody. And we will put this recording on YouTube. And Karen said that I'm sorry, Alderman Sienko, fancy name, said that I can go ahead and share the PowerPoint as well. So I'll email the PowerPoint out to everyone who is registered. So if you weren't able to get down some of those URLs, you'll be able to get those then. And then just wanted to reiterate what the Alderman mentioned about Elmhurst Connect. It's a really good place to start when you've got a concern. Because then it'll go through those appropriate channels. And then also just, you know, reaching out to your ward alderman and finding out who your ward alderman is. So thanks so much, Alderman Hill and Alderman Sienko, for coming out today.